First of all, I would like to acknowledge IIT Indore and Dr. Sen Gupta especially for inviting me here. It's a privilege, and it's a privilege especially when you know that this is the inaugural edition of IEEE chapter. Now, to start with, why blockchain? I mean, things get to as simple as maintaining records. Typically, everything that we do today, whether we book a flight, whether we book a hotel, whether we do online shopping, everything includes transactions. Earlier, it used to be offline transactions, so people used to maintain these records in ledgers, in handwritten ledgers. Today, we maintain them in online ledgers, right? However, and why do we need to maintain those records? Because there shouldn't be any argument later on. There should not be any arbitration issues later on. And for record keeping, for government, for all kinds of reasons. Now, if you really look at it, most of these records today are maintained by a central authority, which means if you want to do some property transaction, then there's a central stamp authority which maintains the records of all properties. If you want to do some financial transaction, then you have the bank, which becomes the central authority which maintains these records. Even if you want to book a hotel, or if you want to do a online shopping, you have Amazon, which probably maintains as a shopping site, which maintains all the records, irrespective of the vendors and consumers. There may be thousands of vendors on Amazon, and there may be millions of consumers who are utilizing those services, but essentially the records are maintained by Amazon, which becomes the arbitrator in case there's an argument. So, while this has been the tradition, we also have to understand what are the pitfalls of having a central authority. Typically, the moment you have a central authority, you have challenges in terms of security of that data. There is a huge vulnerability that gets attached whenever there's information concentrated at one place. And every day morning we open the newspapers reading, so many emails have been hacked and so much of user data has been lost. Some reported, some not reported, some known, some not known. So that's one of the big challenges. The second issue with centralized authority is the moment information is concentrated in one place, the organizations tend to become bureaucratic. So there's some students sitting here. Typically, if you have to go to a university to collect your degree, probably you'll have to visit 3 times, because someone will say, today we're not working. Someone will say, get that form from the college. Someone will say, get that permission, show me your bona fide certificate. So there's a lot of bureaucracy that comes in whenever you have a centralized authority. And third and most irritating is probably the levy of service charges and arbitrary charges which are collected, because there's no one who can question that. I was just reading a report recently where SBI has probably earned more money by levying fines than doing banking transactions. So you do more than 3 transactions from your ATM, you have to pay a certain additional fee. Or tomorrow they may come up and say every 2nd Saturday and 4th Saturday you want to do a transaction, you have to pay additional fee. When I buy dollars from the bank, the exchange rate is different. When my client sends me dollars, the exchange rate that the bank gives me is different, because there is a centralized authority and there is no one who can question them. So this is what typically happens when you have a centralized authority. So, ideally speaking, people should be able to do peer-to-peer transaction. When I want to send money to someone, I don't need a permission of anyone. When I want to sell property to someone, I don't need the permission of anyone. But of course, we need the security. We also need to ensure that there is someone who is able to arbitrate what if we get into an argument. And we obviously want it to be a non-manipulative transaction, because today that is what the central authority guarantees. When you pay me money, and if I get into an argument with you, it is the bank which states that yes, we have a record that this gentleman has paid money and this gentleman has received money in his account, isn't it? It's as simple as that. Now, blockchain promises to do this in a peer-to-peer manner. Blockchain promises to do this with full security. Blockchain promises to do this by ensuring that you have an immutable database wherein you cannot ever edit or overwrite a record. That's when I say it promises to do that, it does that today. But it's still an emerging technology. So as we go in the discussion, as we go further, then probably we'll also clarify some of these points. But as of now, it would probably be feasible to say that blockchain promises to do all these things. So let's take a step back and also try and understand how did blockchain emerge? What is blockchain? And before we talk about what is blockchain and how did blockchain emerge, I think we should also clarify at this moment, blockchain is not Bitcoin. Because the moment people talk about blockchain, there are a lot of other people who say, smile and say, hi, yeah, I know about blockchain. It's Bitcoins, right? People have lost money, or it's going up or it's going down kind of thing. So blockchain is not Bitcoin. And we have to understand why blockchain is not Bitcoin and why is it that Bitcoin and blockchain are talked so much together, right? Now for this, we have to go back about 10 or 12 years back, go back to 2006-07, when there was a global financial meltdown and some of the world's best known financial institutions collapsed, like Lehman Brothers and others. People realized that the banks whom we trust, because we've all grown up thinking that the money is not safe at home, the money is safe at banks. We've also grown up thinking that banks do a lot of due diligence where they invest the money, right? But during the subprime crisis, people realized that the banks and also probably the governments were not doing enough due diligence, and a lot of hard-earned money of people actually got wiped out overnight as the bubble burst. So there was this growing thought that why should we even trust government? Why should government be generating a currency? The currency which is given by the government is called fiat currency. So rupee is a fiat currency in India, dollar is a fiat currency in America. So people said, why should we trust government? Why should we trust these banks? Why should we not go back to our own barter system where I want to give you something and you want to give me something, we are both happy? Why should we get the government in between? So far we believed in the government, so far we believed in the banks because they were probably investing our money and giving us returns, but that doesn't seem to be the case. That was thought, and that's where this pseudonymous or anonymous person came up with a concept of Bitcoin and said this is going to be a digital currency and this is going to be a democratic currency where the demand and supply will actually decide the price. Because there is always this discussion about how governments manipulate currency to increase their imports or exports or to maintain the balance of power in a socio or geopolitical environment. So people said that let's have our own currency, which is Bitcoins, and this will be a purely democratic currency where the users will define and decide the price of that. Now, ever since Bitcoin came up, there are more than thousands of cryptocurrencies which are floating in the market today. I mean, every alternate day you have a company coming up with an ICO. Like you have the IPO in the traditional world, you have ICOs in the cryptocurrency world. Most governments in the world have not accepted Bitcoins. Most governments in the world look at Bitcoin as a threat, because if you look at it, government's control over the citizens is primarily because of the currency that they control, and they won't want to lose that control. Also, the fact that it is probably going to create a lot of vulnerability to regular citizens, ordinary citizens and all that. So most countries in the world have still not accepted Bitcoins. However, when Bitcoin was created and Bitcoin transactions started, people said that, look, it's a digital currency. It's not a physical hard asset. If it's a physical hard asset, I have 2 copies of this asset or 2 copies of this currency. I give it to someone. There's no way I can reproduce the same thing. But if it's a digital asset, I need to keep track of it. I need to ensure there's no double spending. I need to ensure there is some way in which it is foolproof that any transaction that I'm doing across the world, across the globe, is maintained and recorded. And that is where the emergence of blockchain. So blockchain essentially came as a record keeping for Bitcoins. And over a period of time, while Bitcoins have not been accepted by governments across the world, most governments as of today do not accept Bitcoins or cryptocurrency as a regular currency, or even, I mean, there's a gray area. People don't call it illegal, but at the same time, it's not legal. So it's a very difficult definition to say. But irrespective of the status of Bitcoins, blockchain has been adopted, and blockchain has been adopted wonderfully, and blockchain has been adopted with open arms, including governments in India. There are at least 4 or 5 states in India which are being very proactive with blockchain for maintaining land records and all that. So that's the context that I want to clarify. Don't mix up Bitcoins with blockchain, though their origin is, together. However, they don't coexist necessarily. There are a lot of confusion, lot of questions about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and that will continue to be there for some more time. But blockchain has come of age, and acceptance of blockchain today is no longer a question mark. The only question marks about blockchain are more in terms of scalability, more in terms of other challenges, which we'll probably discuss as we go further. So that being the case, I've talked to you about why do we need something like blockchain and how did blockchain arrive in the scene, right? Now, I'll consciously avoid getting into a little technology of blockchain as to how it works and all that. We can always do it offline after this discussion if some of you are interested. But coming back to the topic about blockchain itself and coming to what are the use cases of blockchain and how blockchain will probably revolutionize, and what does the world think about it? What does the industry think about it? What do people talk about blockchain? So what we have to also understand is blockchain is more a foundational technology. And 21 years back, like internet was getting into mainstream and people said everything after this will change. That's the same kind of discussion that we hear about blockchain. And I'm not here specifically to be a salesman of blockchain, so I'll be very, very balanced in how I put it across. I'm today talking to you about what we generally talk, what we generally hear. Now the jury is out and time will decide how far this comes true, because we are also in a very hype cycle in that sense of blockchain. But there are some fundamental reasons why blockchain will probably work like this. Okay, so let's first identify some of the properties of blockchain. Let's understand what are the things that blockchain allows you to do and what is so unique about blockchain. I mean, why should we even need blockchain, right? I already told you about some of the things, including peer-to-peer transaction, meaning a distributed architecture, immutable database, which means blockchain is a write once, read many times kind of a database. It doesn't allow you to rewrite or overwrite. Anything you write in that gets appended. Then we also spoke about how blockchain is doesn't allow any kind of levy of service charge and all that, because there is no centralized authority, right? Now, let's also understand very quickly, if there is no central authority, how is it that the blockchain transaction can be guaranteed, and how and who will arbitrate this blockchain transaction, or who will verify this blockchain transaction, right? So there's a little bit of gamification that happens here. Everyone who participates in the blockchain network, okay, participates and gives his vote in a way and says that yes, I have seen the transaction happening. Okay, when I say I have seen the transaction happening, there's no physical person who's sitting there. The program kind of endorses and says, I have seen the transaction happening there. Now the question will be, if there's a transaction that's happening between Dr. Anirban and me, why should everyone else in the room or everyone outside in the world be so interested in participating in that transaction, burn their resources, and also endorse this transaction? So we have to give some reward for this, right? We have to give some reward to attract people to participate in this endorsement. Now, even if it's a big reward, if I'm going to divide it amongst all the people sitting in the room, probably the people sitting in the room will not be excited about it. They'll say, hey, for this, we are not going to spend so much time and effort and burn our resources. So then we say, no, the reward is big and the reward will be given only to one person. The reward will be given to only one person. Then the reward becomes a little attractive. It becomes like a lottery ticket where everyone wants to try their luck at, right? It's a guaranteed reward, because if the transaction is going to happen, then the endorsement is required. If the endorsement is going to happen by people sitting in the room, then one of them will get reward by the end of the transaction. So it's a very attractive proposition. Now, how do I give that reward? After the endorsement of the transactions is done, there is a puzzle which is thrown, right? There's a puzzle which is thrown, and whoever solves that puzzle first gets the reward. In blockchain language, this is called a mechanism of consensus. So first, you get an endorsement by multiple people, and then you have something called proof of work, which means based on the resource quality, based on the computational resources that you have, based on the brute force that you apply to solve this puzzle, you also get the reward. Now this is work in progress. There are different companies and different ideas which are floating, different modes of consensus, different modes of how do you give this reward, because there's a lot of criticism about burning of resources and all these kind of things. So that's work in progress, and I'm not getting into that at this point of time. I think it suffices to just give you an idea about how this transaction happens. So what is happening here? Everyone is participating, everyone is endorsing, or a majority of people, if they endorse, I can go ahead with that. So in this room, if I get an answer from 60% of the people or 51% of the people who say that yes, we've seen this transaction happening and we endorse this transaction to happen. So when I say they see the transaction, they don't see the actual transaction, but they see the metadata of the transaction, meaning they understand that this transaction happened of this size at this timestamp and all that. So the privacy of transaction is still not revealed, but there's an endorsement of the transaction. And when I get a majority of that endorsement, then I can safely say that yes, this transaction happened. Especially because in this room, there is no vested interest. There's no one who's going to talk on my behalf, or there's no one who's going to talk on Dr. Anirban's behalf, right? It's a neutral audience, which is what becomes a public blockchain. And Bitcoin is an example of public blockchain where anyone can participate in this endorsement game. You can join in, you can join out. There is no permission required to join in or join out. Permission required to get in or get out of this. So you decide when you want to participate, and whenever you participate, you have the transaction. Whatever transaction happens, the copy of that comes to everyone on the network. So if there are 10,000 people, the copy comes to 10,000 people. If there are 50,000 people, the copy comes to 50,000 people. If there are 500 people, the copy comes to 500 people. And automatically the endorsement happens. When the majority of endorsement is received, then the transaction is deemed to be completed and the reward happens. This is what happens in a public blockchain. Since we have to give a reward, there has to be a native asset in a public blockchain, which means Bitcoin is an asset. Similarly, you could have Ether as an asset in an Ethereum blockchain, right? Some currency. You have to give a reward in some currency. So that currency is what becomes a native asset in a public blockchain. Now, like a cloud architecture, while it's a great idea to talk about public cloud, we also know that most of the companies would be terrified, or their customers would be terrified if they are told that their data will be on the cloud. You can talk about all the security, you can talk about all the things, but people say, no, my data, you don't put it on the cloud, try with someone else. I mean, 10 years down the line after cloud architecture, we still talk like that. And I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I was reading somewhere, Amazon doesn't put its data on cloud, on public cloud when I say cloud, right? So it's even if as a client, I mean, even as a company, if you may be happy about it or comfortable about it, you have to think about your customers, you have to think about your analysts. So there are many stakeholders, right? So similar to public cloud and private cloud debate, you also have this debate of public blockchain and private blockchain, right? While public blockchain is a purest idea of how a blockchain should be, the most democratic way things should happen, but we also know it's not going to be so easy. We also know it's going to be complicated, and there's a problem there of again giving this rewards. So that means somewhere you also have to collect transaction fee. If you have to give a reward, you also have to collect transaction fee. So are we going back to the old system where you were feeding the bank till yesterday, and today you are saying no, now you have to feed a Ethereum company, or you have to feed someone else, collect the transaction fee and then give back the reward? Of course, the difference here is this transaction fee which you are collecting and giving back as a reward is not, I mean, it's proportionate, it's not arbitrary. It's not for profit making. It's more for this gamification. Anyways, enterprises said, look, the idea is all good. We like whatever you're saying, but we can't put the data in the public domain, and we don't want that to happen, which is where you have the concept of private blockchain. It is like saying, instead of taking an opinion from all the students in IIT, if I want to come up with a new policy in IIT, I'll probably talk to the HODs of 3 departments, and it is assumed the HODs are a representative of their students of their departments, which means that I still get a democratic view, but it is not necessarily opened up to everyone. It's a committee which is formed and designated people are allowed to vote. Now that's exactly what happens in an enterprise blockchain or private blockchain, where you have the data copied in designated systems, meaning it's a private blockchain, so it's a permission blockchain, not anyone. So if it's an IIT matter, I'm sure I would not be allowed to come in and speak about that, or students of other college will not be allowed to come and speak about that, because they know what is good for them and they decide what is good for them. It need not be. So while it is democratic, it is not open to everyone. So it's a permission network. Only participants who are given the permission or given a certificate, a digital certificate, who have the credentials are allowed to participate in the network. And once they participate in the network, based on their designation, based on their role, some will be allowed to endorse, or it could be all will be allowed to endorse. That's a policy which can be decided. So that is what makes blockchain a private blockchain. So this is basically the difference which I wanted to bring about public blockchain and private blockchain. But let's again go back to the fundamental question of why blockchain. If we are talking about immutability, I'm sure if someone has worked on regular databases, people would say we could provide immutability on even on a regular database. We could have enough tools on a regular database. If you talk about for example, if you talk about non-manipulation of data, people say we have enough forensics tools to ensure that if there's any manipulation, we can raise an alert, we can raise a flag. If you talk about cryptography or if you talk about security, end of the day, those security algorithms, cryptographic algorithms have been there for 15, 20 years now. They keep improving, and the same is going to be used in blockchain also. So what is the big deal of using blockchain? Are you understanding? And which is where I keep insisting this, and a lot of times, we have to keep reminding ourselves, while all these technologies and all these properties exist and can be, achieved, all these objectives can be achieved independently by using various technologies, blockchain brings all of them together. And that's where it's also an inherent property of blockchain. So that's what makes it attractive. It's not as if we did not have a mechanism of distributed architecture. It's not as if we did not have a mechanism of encryption and decryption. It's not as if we did not have a mechanism of having a immutability property in database. You could achieve it in many ways. It's not as if you did not have a way of standardizing things. I mean, as early as 1990s, and sir has written a book on XML, he will bear with me, you used to have EDI, Enterprise Data Interchange, where every company used to have a client and server of a particular brand to do the ERP transactions. So if vendor and supplier have to talk to each other, they would have their own proprietary brand of exchanging data, and which is where XML came in, and internet and XML combination made it absolutely free. All those tons and tons of money which were spent on EDI would just not be required because you had a standard called XML where data could be floating between organizations in a neutral format, right? Now, similar to that, today in a supply chain kind of a scenario, when there's so many vendors, suppliers and stakeholders attached, there's so much of data that passes every point. And as the data passes from each point to the other point, you always have this challenge of data getting corrupted, either intentionally or unintentionally. Now, what blockchain promises to bring is it makes it a single source of truth. Everyone on the network will always in real time have the same information, which means now I don't have to get into this discussion of I'll send you the file by evening or get a reply back saying that the file you sent is corrupted, or we have to do reconciliation of accounts because you have some information and I have some information. And that's the biggest pain point today in any business transaction that you do. So whenever you have a multi-party transaction system, and I'm assuming everywhere around we have a multi-party transaction system, you need some kind of standardization. You need what we call a single source of truth, and blockchain becomes that single source of truth. Blockchain becomes that standard approach to follow things. Now, again, could we not have achieved it in another way? Of course, we could have achieved it in another way also. Of course, as I keep telling, you could write custom programs for doing all these things, right? But just all that coming together and all that being an inherent part of the blockchain basic framework makes it very attractive. This is how I look at blockchain in a very neutral perspective without the hype of blockchain. So I think that is what I wanted to talk briefly about why blockchain. So essentially we talk about 4 properties when we talk about blockchain. One is about provenance, which is maintaining a log, maintaining a history, tracking every detail, when that transaction happened, how it happened, and what was the next transaction. So you maintain a history of that. Second is single source of truth. So across the network, all the participants will always guaranteed have the same true copy of information. So there's no question of reconciliation. Third is what we talk in terms of standardization. Now that's a selling point because probably Oracle would say if you all get onto Oracle, then it's a standard. Some other company would say if you all get into my platform, then it's a standard. So that way blockchain talks about standardization, where it says that you don't have to have your custom ways of doing all these things. All of you can come together on blockchain and become standard. And then of course about immutability, which is a very important property. Blockchain doesn't allow any overwriting of things. So you can be rest assured there's no manipulation, there's no backdate transaction that is going to happen. So these are some of the key properties of blockchain. And each of these property individually can always be done in many other ways also, but all of them coming together, all of them being an inherent part of this system makes it very interesting. There's one very other interesting thing about blockchain, which I would like to touch here before talking a little bit about some of the use cases. And that is the concept of smart contracts. The programs that you write in blockchain are called smart contracts. What are smart contracts? For people who are in this room who are old timers, it's like a rule engine. We've all used rule engines for a long time, where you write some set of code and you say, if this condition applies, then do this. If this happens, then do this, right? So you have these smart contracts, which are essentially rule engines. What it does and what it allows is, it allows you to trigger actions without human intervention, which means that if a certain property is not met, or if a certain condition is not met, it can raise a penalty, or if a certain condition is met, it can trigger some other action. So this again brings about a lot of interesting things, especially in a multi-party transaction system, because you don't have to wait for each other. And probably, if I were to give an example, you have this farmer subsidy in India, and Madhya Pradesh elections, which got completed recently, had this as one of the main issues about farmer subsidies, and how a lot of times farmer subsidies allocated at the state level or central level. And here I'm not going to talk about one party or the other party, but I'm talking in general about what happens in a system like India. You have the central government, irrespective of which party it is. So first of all, if a farmer faces some distress, let's say it's a flood or a drought or something like that, the farmer has to go to the mandal officer or the local officer and prove that his crop has got damaged, and prove that this much of damage has happened to his crop. Based on that, a report will be sent to the collectorate office. Based on that, the report will go to the state government, and from there it goes to the central government. The central government will probably arbitrate with the insurance provider, and once it is agreed, reconciled and all that, that report or that allocation of fund goes to the state government. From there it goes to the district collectorate. From there it goes to the mandal level person. Now by this time, enough damage has been done. The farmer's life goes for a toss, and he gets into a new death cycle, which gets created just because of the delay of all that. So people are saying, why don't you have a system? And we are trying this experiment with ICRISAT, which is world leader in agriculture research in an African country. We are trying this as a pilot basis. People are saying, based on the weather forecast or based on how much rainfall has happened, why don't you put an estimate of how much crop damage has happened in which region, and why don't you trigger something where the amount can first be rendered to the account of the farmer, and then you can do all this business, right? I mean, people have changed passport in India today, right? You don't have police verification. You first give the passport and do a police verification later, because the logic is, can't we trust our citizens? 1 in a million cases could be a mischief maker. But why don't you give the passport and then do the verification later? Similarly here, why don't you first allocate the fund, and then you can do all these kind of things as much as you want to do. And it can be on many scientific grounds. But the point I'm trying to make is, even after funds are allocated, just the transaction moving from one point to the other point to the other point takes a hell lot of time in India. And that can be avoided if you can use something like a smart contract, which can directly trigger. So again, nothing great, nothing big. We've all used rule engines for a long time. It's not something magical that has come. But I keep repeating the point that all of this coming together is what makes it interesting. The combination is a little interesting, because you have the single source of truth, so you can trigger the rule engine. If you don't have the single source of truth, how will you trigger the rule engine? How will you ever say that this has to be done? Because first we have to reconcile. So your reconciliation is no longer a challenge. That's what makes it interesting. Again, going back to a point about the regulatory framework in India, it has to be made very clear that while Bitcoins is a gray area, there's absolutely no question or no hindrance as far as blockchain is concerned. In fact, Government of India, in the last budget, the finance minister spoke about blockchain. Government of Telangana, Government of Andhra, Government of Maharashtra, Government of West Bengal, a lot of these governments are investing now heavily in putting land records on blockchain. The challenge today is every department in the state government has a different record of the same property. In one department, my property is on my name. In the other department, it's on my neighbor's name. In some other department, it's in my uncle's name. And even after I've sold the property, 10 years later, someone can create a issue out of it, right? And that's not the healthy climate, and that's not the way you want things to move. So that's what I wanted to talk about, the regulatory framework. Bitcoins, I would not want to dwell in that, because it's a slightly more complex topic. It's not called illegal. At the same time, you're not supposed to do some trading. So there's some factors related to that we can discuss later. Now, this is essentially what probably I would want to talk in terms of blockchain origin, the kind of mechanism of blockchain. What I would want to quickly jump to is take up one or two use cases and try and tell you how blockchain is changing. I've already discussed about the agriculture and the broadly about the supply chain management kind of a thing. But look at it from many other ways also. What it essentially does is cuts the middleman out. So if I'm an artist, right, today the production company or the distribution company makes more money than the artist. So at one end you have the consumers which feel cheated of paying so much money, and the other end you have the artists who probably don't get enough due to their thing. Once they become famous, that's a different case, but the emerging artists don't get that. What blockchain can help is ensure you are directly able to connect to the artist, and it helps you in a way where one is your DRM and all that, which has already been there, digital rights management and all that, where you can ensure that you can pay per usage kind of a thing. And second, you can ensure that the subscription and all that is directly with the artist. You don't need any middleman, or you don't need a distribution company in between. Or even if you look at the shared economy models of Uber, Ola, Oyo and all that. While Uber disrupted the transportation industry or the public transportation industry in that sense, today the challenge is that as power gets concentrated with Uber, as Uber gets more and more information about its users, as Uber gets more and more information about the user behavior, they also start manipulating things. And there are a lot of documented case studies which talk about how if your battery is low, the Uber fare that is shown to you is higher than the regular fare. How if every day you go to office at 9 o'clock and you start at 8 o'clock, if on a specific day you are booking the cab at 8:30, it knows that you're already late, so you have less time to negotiate, so it increases the fare. And these are documented. I'm not making stories out of this or not exaggerating anything of that sort. The question people are asking is, why do we need an Uber? You have a cab, I want to travel, the algorithm should take care of that. So blockchain becomes that central platform, or blockchain becomes that platform. Central would be a little politically wrong word to use in blockchain, but blockchain becomes that platform which can manage the two ends. You don't need a central authority, you don't need an arbitrator, because if you look at Uber, Uber is also doing the arbitration, because if for any reason. Now, of course, every time we talk about a new technology, we build a lot of fantasies. We talked about web services in 98, 99, and a lot of mainstream web services we started seeing in 2007, 2008. So it's early days for blockchain. I think it's going to take at least 5 to 7 years more when blockchain real-time applications you'll see, which are scalable, which have gone through a lot of evolution, like the iPod example Mr. Chandak was given. We are probably talking at iPod 0 version. You'll have the first, second, third and fourth version also. But what is becoming more and more interesting and what is becoming more and more exciting for technology professionals, for students, is that there seems to be a lot of interest now in the leadership in large corporations. We've just 2 days back completed a POC for UTC. UTC is a $128 billion company. They have brands like Otis Lifts, Carrier AC, and all your aircraft engine and all that. And it's a very interesting case study. I won't be able to get into the details because of the NDA we have signed. Today what happens, there are multiple stakeholders in this kind of a game, and whenever there's a delay, so let's say there are apples which are being transported from Kashmir to Hyderabad, and if there's a delay in that, it may go bad. And there's always a lot of this confusion and debate about who is responsible for these kind of delays. The other side of the story is, let's say mangoes are transported from India or Africa to Walmart, and Walmart slices those mangoes and serves it to its customers, and they find an infection in one of the slices of the mango. They ban the imports from the country altogether, and that affects a huge population of farmers in a certain country. What blockchain also allows you is to track every moment of that from farm to table, at every step. What is the source, where did it move, which hands did it pass through, and in real time you can track the source of that information. And when you track the source of that information, then you can probably say that, oh, these mangoes have come from a specific district in India, and let's avoid that for the time being, but we don't have to penalize all the other farmers who are producing this in India. So these are the kind of detailing which happens. It also kind of controls the fraud that is happening. Typically today, for example, in the name of organic food, anything can be sold because you don't know the source of that. So the labeling is what is your trust. But if I were to just take my phone and scan that QR code, and if it can take me back to the stages from where it went, please understand, you'll say that why do you need blockchain for all this? We could do this with any other system also, right? But with any other system, there is always a chance of manipulation. There's always a chance of going to the back date and changing. So the collation of information, if you understand, will not match up if everything is put on blockchain. You can fool around in one section, you can fool around in other section, but these end-to-end things these dots will not connect. So it makes a lot of sense to put a lot of this information in blockchain. The other thing which I want to bring to everyone's notice is the fact that the relevance of blockchain and the adoption of blockchain will happen more in developing countries than in some of the developed countries, because there are already a lot of systems in place in the developed countries, and blockchain tries to bring some sanity in places where there's no system. So in India, for example, you go to a hospital and after your treatment is done, everyone knows how much of pain it is to go to the insurance company and claim the insurance. You actually start asking yourself, is it even worth talking to the insurance company and getting your insurance claim done? But what is the confusion about? The insurance company wants the records. Have you genuinely been treated or not? The hospital has to give the relevant data, what the insurance company wants. And if there's an angle where you are below poverty, then probably in India the government also steps in, because it will provide some of the insurance. Some part of it will be provided by a private company, some part of it will be provided by a government. Now, just for these three stakeholders to know what is happening, to understand what is happening, to accept and reconcile this information takes a hell lot of time. The other side of the story is that there are a lot of people who falsely claim this subsidy, falsely claim these advantages, because again it's very easy to create false information in various silos in the government. So the same person may be shown as age of 14 years and getting a education scholarship, and the same person can be shown in another department with 60 years of age and get medical insurance. There's no collation of data. What blockchain allows and helps is tries to avoid all that. And just to re-emphasize this point of backdate correction and all that, let's look at some examples of contracts which are given by government, for example, or for that matter even other public enterprises. Let's say it's construction of a road, and I'm taking a very raw and a simple example. You'll all bear with me. Let's say it's the construction of a road, and I was coming from airport to this place and I saw some very beautiful roads in Indore, very clean roads. Let's say the contract is given and says that the road has to be of width 60 feet and it has to be of thickness of 6 inches, for example. That's the contract which is given, and people bid for that. Someone may bid and say that I would be charging 1 lakh per kilometer. The other person bids and says that I would be charging only 90,000 rupees per kilometer. And as per the tender process, as per the L1 process, the guy who says 90,000 per kilometer will obviously get that tender. Now, it's a documented fact that in most of the cases, after this tender is allocated, the tender specifications are changed, because no one goes back and checks all that. No one bothers to know whether you had talked about 60 feet or you had talked about 6 inches. And this is a very obvious thing, so it's probably easy to find out, but I'm talking about a lot of other specifications which actually are changed in backdate, and that's where a lot of manipulation happens. Now blockchain will stop all these things. So blockchain in that sense, for a country like India, for a developing nation like India, makes a lot of sense, which is where I believe that a lot of governments, a lot of state governments we interact with, a lot of corporations we interact with are very gung-ho about blockchain. There are challenges with blockchain. One of the biggest challenges with blockchain is, as of today, if you were to do a credit card or a debit card transaction, the speed at which those transactions happen, blockchain is nowhere close to that. So it's not even 1/10 of that speed. But like I keep telling, it's work in progress. Some of the large companies, including Microsoft, Oracle, Google, all of them have now started looking at blockchain a little more seriously. Microsoft has a workbench with Azure integration to blockchain, and what they have done very smartly is they have said that we don't want to get into this competition of which blockchain is better, but we'll give you Azure, and Azure will ensure that it will talk to any blockchain, and it will talk so smoothly that you don't have to worry is there blockchain on the other side or not, while getting all the advantages of blockchain. Similarly, you have Oracle providing some services now. So that way I think it's becoming better and better, because one of the criticism or questions about blockchain for a long time was, well, blockchain is good, but how do we trust this guy from Russia who's come up with Ethereum? How do we trust that kid who has come up with this blockchain? There's no serious big company who's endorsing blockchain or who's talking about blockchain. I think that has changed. That has changed in the last 1.5 years. This is probably what I wanted to talk about blockchain in general, but I'll be very happy if you have any specific questions, and I can probably elaborate a little more on that. So the technology.
Okay, sure. So we have to thank the speaker. Idealabs FutureTech Ventures, Hyderabad.